Behold, the MRI. But where did it come from? Meet Raymond Damadian, born in New York in 1936. Nowadays, Raymond is known for his pioneering medical breakthroughs, but that's not his only talent. For 8 years, he studied violin at Juilliard. Luckily for medicine, and perhaps unfortunately for music fans, he concentrated on medicine. While working at the SUNY Downstate Medical Center, he researched the levels of potassium and sodium in human cells. As he studied the process known as nuclear magnetic resonance, he realized that he could map the chemistry of the human body. His stuff of genius struck. Would it be possible to build a device that could safely scan the human body with this technique, replacing invasive procedures and X-ray scans? It turns out this is possible, and Raymond built a machine to do it. He called his machine the Indomitable, and in 1977, he used it to conduct the first NMR scan of a patient. Later inventors refined the process, making it possible to construct an image with the data. Here's how it works. When atomic nuclei are exposed to a magnetic field, they emit radio waves at a consistent frequency. The body part under examination is placed at the exact center of the magnetic field. The MRI uses pulses of radio waves to concentrate on a tiny point inside the patient's body and determine what type of tissue it is through the interaction of these radio waves. The MRI does this repeatedly, building a map of tissue types from the result, and then combining these results into images and models. Raymond's idea didn't take off right away, and he didn't come up with the entire idea by himself. However, he did acquire the first patent for the technology, and it has been used to diagnose injuries across the world.
Hi, my name is Dr. Raymond Damadian. I am a young Earth creation scientist and believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, just as recorded in the book of Genesis. By God's grace and the devoted prayers of my godly mother-in-law, I invented the MRI scanner in 1969. The idea that scientists who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old cannot do real science is simply wrong.
As a young boy growing up in Queens, New York, Ray Damadian enjoyed making things. From model airplanes to erector sets, Damadian was motivated to analyze and solve problems. It's that same thrill of discovery that still guides him today.
We're going to be able to image the brain while it's in the anti-gravity position.
Curiosity is a major driving force, and the same delight that a child has at seeing something new for the first time is always there for somebody in a scientific career.
He never imagined, though, that one day he would invent a machine that would revolutionize the field of medicine.
When I got into the scientific arena and saw the prospect of developing a new kind of medical machine, I enjoyed the prospect of wading right into it and getting directly involved in building such a thing.
Damadian didn't just wade, he jumped, believing that there was a better way to see inside the human body. And so he set out to develop a machine, which he later nicknamed Indomitable, that could safely and non-invasively offer doctors an accurate picture of the human body in cross-section. But Damadian and his colleagues at Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn faced a daunting challenge. The principle of nuclear magnetic resonance had been discovered in the 1930s and had been used to examine the physical properties of a variety of substances. But Damadian and his associate Freeman Cope were the first to obtain a scan of living cells. The earliest images demonstrated, as Damadian had expected, that healthy tissue and diseased tissue might look very different. Still, few believed it was possible to successfully scan a human being.
Going from the first test tube experiment to the construction of Indomitable and the first human scan, we had significant numbers of people forecasting that was beyond any prospect of going from a tiny test tube to the human body and overcoming all the technological obstacles.
To succeed, Damadian and his colleagues had to build a magnet large enough for a person to fit inside. No small feat. A first attempt at a human scan failed. But in July of 1977, Damadian's assistant, Larry Minkoff, entered Indomitable, and history was made.
It was explosive elation. It was almost unbelievable that we got there.
To move his innovation forward, Damadian formed Phonar, the company that in 1980 produced the first commercial MRI scanner.
Once we had been able to see that scanning the human body was real and could be accomplished, you wanted to be part of that. You didn't want to be just a shoreline observer as the ship sailed off into the horizon.
Today, Phonar is involved in new research to enhance magnetic resonance imaging, including the development of an upright machine and an MRI operating room, allowing doctors to view a live scan while they conduct surgery. For Ray Damadian, the creative process is one of tapping into one's natural talents and following one's inspiration toward truth. As an inventor and company executive, Raymond Damadian has drawn on his skills to revolutionize the practice of medicine. By giving doctors an invaluable tool to peer inside the body, his work continues to help save literally millions of lives.
We've just scratched the surface. I mean, the potential, the biggest potential for the technology is yet to come.
In 2003, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to the pioneers of MRI scanning technology. But of those honoured for this amazing medical breakthrough, there was a glaring omission. Incredibly, the Nobel Committee did not recognise Dr. Raymond Damadian, who is widely known as the man who invented the MRI scanner. The two men who did receive the Nobel Prize certainly contributed to the field, but there's no doubt that Damadian made the pioneering breakthroughs. And what makes his exclusion even more suspect is that up to 3 people can share the award. It does make you wonder if the committee's decision was influenced by the fact that Raymond Damadian is an outspoken Christian creationist. Even atheistic philosophy professor Michael Roos confessed, "I cringe at the thought that Raymond Damadian was refused his just honour because of his religious beliefs."
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
To you our warmest congratulations, and I now ask you to step forward to receive the Nobel Prize from the hand of His Majesty the King.
Hello, I'm Sam Stanley, President of Stony Brook University. It is my honor and pleasure to pay tribute to one of the brightest of Stony Brook's shining stars, Dr. Paul C. Lauterbur. It was 40 years ago, right here in this chemistry department, that Dr. Lauterbur conducted the landmark research that led to the development of magnetic resonance imaging, a technique that has revolutionized healthcare, saved millions of lives, and improved the quality of life for tens of millions more. It was for that research that Dr. Lauterbur was awarded the 2003 Nobel Prize in Medicine. Today, more than 60 million MRI scans are performed worldwide every year. As a physician, I have firsthand experience of the vital role that Dr. Lauterbur's groundbreaking discovery plays in the day-to-day practice of medicine and the tremendous impact it has on medical research. All of us here at Stony Brook University are extremely proud of Dr. Lauterbur and his contribution to science and humanity. The designation of our chemistry department as a National Historic Chemical Landmark by the American Chemical Society is a wonderful tribute to this great man and an honor to our university.
Carefully building a research faculty, and one of our priorities from the beginning days was to find an expert in nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So I was very pleased when the possibility of Paul Lauterber's candidacy for an appointment in our department became a possibility. Paul Lauterber's credentials were unusual, to say the least, because he had been working full-time at the Maryland Institute and going to graduate school on the site at the University of Pittsburgh. And he was apparently, in the record, a fresh PhD. So I was pleased that we were able to arrange an associate professorship position for him, and delighted when, in the fall of 1962, he agreed to come and join us in Stony Brook.
I came to Stony Brook in the fall of 1967. As a freshman, I knew I was going to become a chemist, and I took freshman chemistry from Paul Lauterber. He was teaching the course that year. And sometime during my sophomore year, one of his grad students came to me and said, "Want to work in a lab?" And I said, "Sure." I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it turned out to be Paul Lauterber's lab. Well, I eventually learned that this is an NMR spectrometer, and it's a very early version of what today has become a much more complex piece of instrumentation, but it's one of the central pieces of equipment that's used for analytical chemistry, for analyzing molecules, determining structures of proteins, and so forth. So the main component here is a magnet. So inside here, there's a permanent magnet. For chemical samples, you put the sample in this glass tube called an NMR tube. Look at it. It would go into the spectrometer like this. So now the sample is between the poles of the magnet. You close it up, and then the instrument takes data. And in those days, the way data was recorded was with a pen recorder, which probably no longer works, but there would have been an ink pen on this gadget, and this mechanical device would scan across the paper, and in fact you can still see the trace of an NMR spectrum here. So the spectrum will be slowly swept out. And that's the way NMR was done in 1967. The key in this instrument, where we turn NMR spectroscopy into MR imaging, is right in here. Paul realized is that if you take one of the magnetic field adjustments, and I'm guessing it was probably this one, if you set it way out of whack, turn it all the way up, you then have a magnetic field that changes from one side of the sample to another. It messes up your NMR spectra, but what Paul realized is it now gives you a projection of the object. It's the same instrumentation that eventually was used to produce the first MRI scans. And Paul did that, in fact, on this particular machine.
Some people may wonder why Paul Lauterber used an A60 magnetic resonance instrument for his experiments that first demonstrated magnetic resonance imaging. 40 years ago, electronic circuits were mostly based on vacuum tube technology, which was produced, the more sophisticated the instrument, the more maintenance was required. It was a very high maintenance situation. And equipment maintenance was not high on his priority list. And so the equipment in his own laboratories was often in strong need of maintenance, if not outright inoperative. So he hit upon the idea, he was so excited to try to demonstrate experimentally these principles for making pictures from magnetic resonance signals, that he hit upon the idea of using the departmental A60 magnetic resonance instrument. Now the A60 instrument was of such a physical size that it could only take samples that could fit within a 5mm test tube, like this. Now he realized at the time he was doing these experiments already that in principle he should be able to do this from the water in tissue inside a living organism. And so Paul took it back to the lab and put the clam in the 5mm tube and then filled it with heavy water outside of the clam and proceeded to make an image, the first image of a living organism. We're very fortunate here at Oregon Health and Science University in the Advanced Imaging Center to have behind me over my shoulder a cutting-edge human MRI instrument. Such magnets with these properties would never have been built if Paul Lauterbur or someone after him did not discover how to make pictures from magnetic resonance signals.
Welcome to the PET lab at Brookhaven National Laboratory. PET stands for positron emission tomography. I'm standing in front of some brain scans taken by a PET scanner. Let me start out by saying that PET and MRI are highly complementary. However, what many people don't realize is that PET scans don't begin with a PET scanner. They begin with chemistry. Chemists synthesize labeled compounds, also called radiotracers, to image chemistry that is occurring in the brain and other organs. Let me give you an example. We are now making new radiotracers and using PET and also our MRI scanner across the street to answer questions like, what are the brain circuits that get disrupted when people get addicted to drugs and alcohol, or when they have an eating disorder like obesity? And there are many lessons that Paul Lauterbur's story can teach us. First and foremost is the importance of institutions where creative individuals have the freedom to pursue ideas that are not in the mainstream. Universities in general, and the chemistry department at Stony Brook in particular, provided that freedom to Paul Lauterbur, and his discovery changed the world.
Professor Lauterbur and Professor Mansfield, your discoveries of imaging with magnetic resonance have played a seminal role in the development of one of the most useful imaging modality in medicine today. All indications are that they will be even more important in the future of both medical practice and research, and above all, for the patient. On behalf of the Nobel Assembly at the Karolinska Institute, I wish to convey to you our warmest congratulations, and I now ask you to step forward to receive the Nobel Prize from the hand of His Majesty the King.
Stony Brook chemistry has a long tradition of interdisciplinary research. The best example is the work of Professor Paul Lauterbur, who combined the principles of biology, chemistry, and physics for his Nobel Prize-winning discovery. We're living in very exciting times with many breakthroughs in technology. However, mankind also is facing some of its greatest challenges. Looking ahead, chemistry will definitely play a very important role in dealing with many of these challenges. On behalf of the department, I thank you for watching this video.
Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear. And Doug, we have a special guest with us, Dr. Jerry Bergman. Glad to have you here.
Good to be here. See you, Jerry, again. And
we're actually in his home. We're actually in your home.
Yep.
So he's made us welcome, and we want to do a show. A couple of them if we get the time right. And you've written, how many books have you written, Jerry?
I'm on my 40th.
40 books.
And they're all so incredible. I've read many of them, maybe not all of them. I think you write them faster than I can read them, but they're really, really good. And most of his books are they're dealing with the creation evolution subject in one form or another, most of them?
Yeah, most of them now. Before, I've done books on other areas, textbooks, college textbooks, and so on. But
right.
The books I'm doing now have been the past 20 years, been on this particular issue.
Okay. Now, recently, Doug and I were out in New York, and we talked to Dr. Raymond Damadian.
It was yesterday, actually.
Yeah, it's very recent. Okay, but it just so happens that Jerry here, Dr. Bergman here, is writing a book on the very issue of the MRI and the discovery and some of the things.
Yeah, I already wrote a book. Right here it is.
You wrote a book.
Right here it is.
What's the name of the book?
It's History and Evaluation of Non-Invasive Medical Diagnostic Treatment and Research Techniques. And that was actually a PhD thesis, which was done. My faculty advisor was John Short, who was a professor at University of Pittsburgh. And he worked with me on doing this. In fact, that's how I got interested in Damadian. And my first step in doing the thesis was a lot of reading. And one book I came across was this right here, a machine called Indomitable. And that was the first book that introduced me to Raymond Damadian and the fact that he was a Christian, which I was rather surprised how important that was in his life and in his work. And so I read this book, and of course that led me into other areas. I became aware of him and aware of the technology, and then I became aware of the controversy that was created primarily because he accepted the creation worldview, which has nothing to do with medical field, which he wasn't a medical doctor. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, people brought that in, and his nemesis, Dr. Lauterbur, was a militant evolutionist. And that was part of the conflict that existed between them two in the history of this. As you may know, Lauterbur perfected the technique of analyzing the data. So Damadian came up with a technology to get the data, and Lauterbur came up with a technology to analyze the data because Damadian's technique would have never worked, it was too slow. And Lauterbur was able to get very rapid scans, although they've improved a lot since then, which allowed them to get very effective MRI pictures. So Lauterbur did the math basically and some of the technology, but the idea was originally begun, of course, by Raymond Damadian. In fact, in this book on American inventors, published by Time Life, subtitled The History of Genius, I bought this specifically because I wanted to know what they had to say about Damadian. And it was quite accurate. On page 76, said the work earned Lauterbur, along with English physicist Peter Mansfield, the 2003 Nobel Prize. There was controversy about this, as some scientists felt that Lauterbur and Mansfield technology advances would have been impossible without Damadian's earlier research. His original MRI machine is now in the collection of the Smithsonian. So they accurately brought out that basically they added to Damadian's work. And of course, as you know, Damadian was denied the Nobel Prize pretty clearly, and I did an article in here, Slaughter of the Dissonance book, pretty clearly showing that indeed his creation was the major reason why. Although obviously people are going to dispute that, but nonetheless I think that's the only logical reason you can come up, because the reasons that others came up I've managed to show pretty conclusively are not valid. So it's the only answer you have left. Of course, we don't know for sure because the proceedings are kept secret for 50 years.
Right.
So in 50 years from 2003, we'll find out exactly the details. Although I talked to some of the members of the committee, and they assured me that this was not an issue during the meetings. But now I talked to other people, and they said, yeah, but it was an issue before the meetings. So they already knew that was an issue.
Well, you actually talked to some of the people that were on the committee.
Yep, and it's one person, and he, in writing, he said that was not an issue at the meetings. And so therefore I did some more inquiry work and concluded that indeed that was an issue. But
what we talked to Dr. Damadian about is that there was one fellow that he asked this point blank with, and he said, well, this was not an issue. But then he goes and dies.
Yeah, Dr. What was his name? No, I can't think of his name. He mentioned it to it. Yeah, the guy that said this was not be an issue. He was kind of a friend of Dr. Damadian. He was on the committee, the Nobel Prize committee, and he ended up dying. And apparently, the guy that was going to be doing it, one of the people in charge of it, it's like they found out he was not going to be involved to support Damadian, and then it took.
So before the meeting, he had died. Oh, yeah. I see.
Apparently, I didn't know that was true until we started talking. From the book, I thought he might still be alive. I wasn't sure if he was or not, but apparently he was not. And the idea was that Dr. Damadian himself had not talked to the guy directly for a few years, and so the guy thought he wouldn't be an issue. And then apparently, yeah, he had died. So it was. But the thing is, the guy, Dr. Lauterbur, yeah. He later on says he's going to what's he going to do now? He's one that tries spend his career on molecular evolution or something, or
trying to figure out how life could evolve from non-living molecules or non-biomolecules.
Right. So Harold Urey and Stanley Miller all over again, right?
Evidently, yeah, partially.
So anyway, Dr. Damadian, because in the book itself, his own book, The Gifted Mind, I think you might have a copy of that.
This one right here, yeah.
It's just an incredible book. And he was wondering, there were other things, other factors that might have been, he thought originally, well, because he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a PhD in physicist or whatever, but when you went back over and looked at the criteria for a Nobel Prize, it's medicine, physics, and chemistry.
Yeah, well, his was in physiology or medicine.
You're right.
And so certainly that would include medical doctors.
And the interesting thing about us is for that, in that particular field, you can have 3 recipients.
Right.
And the issue was the Lauterbur and the other, I can't think of Mansfield?
Peter Mansfield, yeah.
Lauterbur said if Damadian gets nominated, he will refuse his.
Yeah, that shows you the antagonism that Lauterbur had.
That's too bad, because when we talked to Dr. Damadian yesterday, he was very gracious about it. And in his book, he talks about what the contributions that Lauterbur did give. And it's really amazing that somebody could be that small-minded, but I think that's what that kind of teaching does. I think we've run across that a lot in evolutionary things. They are very small-minded in a lot of respects. They're very broad-minded as long as you agree with them.
Right.
Right, okay. As so many people are. As long as you're on their side, you're okay. You're broad-minded. Once you say no, I don't think that's right, suddenly you are anathema. You are like a pariah in the circles. You've run across that.
Yeah, we've seen that hate in the books I've written on this topic, which deal with the persecution and the discrimination against what I call Darwin skeptics. Indeed, some people are absolutely vicious, and I've often wondered why. And several people have said probably because if you're right, as one actually evolutionist told me, if you're right, I'm going to spend eternity in hell. So I would rather you be wrong. Therefore, you're very threatening to me. because you basically interfere with the lifestyle I want to live.
This is what I think, even from Thomas Huxley, who made the same statement as I remember. You would know the quote better than I would. It's not that creation is an unviable theory. I'm paraphrasing. It's just that we can't live the way we want to live.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Thomas Huxley said that way back in the day.
Yeah, that's basically, they don't want their sexual freedom is the bottom line. And I think that's one of the things that keeps people away from their receiving God, is that they think that God is going to mess with their sexuality and their sexual lifestyles, and they feel guilty about that, and so then either they deal with that or they end up reject God altogether.
Yeah.
But see, I guess the question, Doug, is, well, that may sound good when you're 20-something and you're hornier than a horn toad, basically. But what happens when you're 85? It's all gone away. By that time, it's like it's like you come up. I don't know what the Bible calls a reprobate mind, or you're so entrenched in a certain way of thinking for so many years you can't change. Remember when I've read things about Voltaire when he was dying and he would see visions of hell swallowing out, flames coming. He was screaming out, and they would say, "Why just change?" Is I can't now.
Yeah,
and that's what really troubles me, because of a short-term thing when you're in your 20s or even 30s or even 40s or 50s. But one time, if you live to be 80 or 90, you're not going to run around. I mean, that whole thing is kind of a moot point. But you've lived your whole life with this mindset, which to me, that's how deception is. You start out this way, and then you get to a point you can't change anymore.
Yeah,
and that's the real sad point.
What else did you in your research find about Dr. Damadian?
One thing that I think is interesting, as you have many others have mentioned, is that you found him an extremely personable, nice guy.
Really?
And one of the reasons they gave for not giving him the prize, because they said he wasn't a nice guy. Now, I don't know what nice guy has to do with it. In fact, some of those who got Nobel Prizes were not at all nice guys. Not in the least were they nice guys.
Yeah.
So that I question that right away. But I've talked to a number of people now who knew him, and they said, no, he is just a very personable, one of the nicest persons they've known. I was up at U of M doing some work, University of Michigan, a while ago, and one of the persons involved in the magnetic resonance imaging program there told me, that's why he didn't get it, because he wasn't a nice guy. And I've heard that from others as well. I've heard that from, in fact, some of the reasons in writing they gave for not giving him the award. I don't like to call it a prize. It's really an award. It's earned.
Yeah, right, it is.
It's not really like you win a prize from a contest. It's an award as a result of your achievement. But I just found no validity for that at all. And when I asked people why, they said, well, he walked out of a meeting once. And, well, maybe he had to go to the bathroom. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he had a phone call. I mean, there are many reasons why someone walks out of a meeting, but that's rather, to me, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel and trying to find a reason besides the real reason, which I concluded because of his rejection of Darwinism. But they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when they try to find reasons not to award him the honor for what he rightfully did.
Well, he really ended up doing all the research. And they were going down a different rabbit trail to find the cause of cancer.
Yeah.
And he was telling about how they were looking for the sodium pump. That it was where you have a difference between the potassium ions and the sodium ions in the cell. And he was looking for this enzyme that would be doing this. And he finally came to the conclusion that there was no such thing. And he then started reading some other research, and they ended up using the special NMR machine to prove his theory and he ended up testing cancer cells from a mouse, and they were able to find out that this technology was able to identify this.
Yeah.
But
he started out with this little 2 1/4 inch diameter thing where he pushed it down into it, and he was able to read it magnetically, and that's where the dream of making a full size magnetic thing like that.
Right, nuclear magnetic resonance was done for chemical analysis.
Yes.
So he felt that why can't we analyze the chemicals in a mouse in this case? And that's about all room he had back then was a that container, which was
had the
hold the organs.
He had a tumor from the mouse. Yeah, he didn't even have it, just a little small.
Yeah.
And then he tried to do the experiment on an actual live mouse, and then he fried it.
He fried it the first time. Yeah, we were talking about the guys that actually went in there. Well, your first experiment, the mouse got fried. They were a little nervous when Dr. Damadian wrapped it around, and when they finally got one built big enough, and he got right around, didn't know what was going, then he didn't get anything. And of course, you know the story. He's the doctor who was a big guy. What was his name? Dr. Goldman or what was his name? Anyway, the big guy, Goldsmith. I can't think of his name offhand, but and he was a big guy. He's like 400 pounder, and he says to Dr. Damadian, "Well, you're too fat." He was talking yesterday.
So that was the too fat hypothesis.
Yeah, too fat hypothesis. So they got little skinny Larry Minkoff at the time. He was a little skinny man. He's still pretty good shape now. I tell you, I don't know. I didn't ask him how old he was, but you know, he's got grandkids and things like that. He's been with Dr. Damadian since the very beginning, and what a neat guy. And he went in there.
He walks in precisely at the time when we were having conversations
about him. Yeah,
about his experience getting into the machine for the very first MRI scan.
Of course, he says it slightly different. He says, "Well, no, I was afraid to be in the machine. Just I was doing some competing research at the same time. I want to help him out." It was really good. It's funny because they've been working together for a lot of years now. It's got to be over 30 years, 30, 40 years.
Well, he was his PhD student.
Yeah, and they've been working together.
Larry Minkoff was, yeah.
The other thing, back to what you were saying earlier, this is something that why Dr. Damadian believed that the creation thing is the big part of it. The Swedish government has now declared that everything is going to be from the evolutionary paradigm. Their science is going to be framed around that framework, the Darwinian evolutionary hypothesis. And Sweden is where the Nobel Prize. I mean, everything is framed around evolution in that culture. And I'm going, well, that gives it a little bit more credence. I'm kind of short changing what exactly the words were, but it was like the whole culture and science in Sweden is evolution now.
Yeah.
Okay. The culture of evolution is epidemic, I call it, because to me it's like a cancer. Okay.
So I can see the political ramifications of that. If you give the Nobel Prize to a creation,
my goodness,
really now validating something that is totally against your national philosophy, apparently.
What really gets you then is all the things that creation has been saying for the last 40 years, 50 years, whatever. The difference is not about science, it's about philosophy.
Yeah.
It's about faith. It's about religion.
Oh, yeah, that's the central thing we're looking at. No one disputes what's been demonstrated scientifically. No one disputes that indeed we had a wolf similar to an animal similar to a wolf, and we got all these breeds of dogs. That's not, of course, the debate. The debate is where we came from. The debate is whether or not indeed from the goo to you by way of the zoo. That's the basic evolutionary teaching, and that's what the debate's about. Whether we came from goo by way of the zoo, or the animal kingdom. And so that's the focus. That's a pithy way of trying to explain what evolution's all about.
Of course, Doug and I are talking, and you, I know you get into it. To me, what really short circuits the whole thing, even before you get to the goo, how do you get to the goo? Yeah. How do you get to the goo from a rock, from a non-living thing to a living thing, in any sane way is absolutely, well, it's not even a theory like evolution is a theory. I know what they say, well, it's so clearly proven. Really? Then why is it still only a theory when the law of biogenesis is a law?
Yeah.
Okay? The law of gravity is a law. There's certainly the law of thermodynamics is a law. It's not theories. These are laws.
Well, right.
There's a difference, okay?
Yeah.
And I don't care how you try to frame evolution, it's still a theory, and it's got lots of flaws, and there's a reason why it's only a theory, and I believe a bad one at that. So anyway, that's the law of biogenesis. Life always comes from life.
Right.
How many of your books do you have that talk about Dr. Damadian's story?
Well, my one book here, which Slavs of Dissidence, has a whole chapter. And then part of a chapter in my next book, which is Silencing the Darwin Skeptics, is Volume 2, and Volume 3 should be out any day, which is Censoring the Darwin Skeptics. And that I do have some information in there about Damadian as well. So it's in 2 books. Oh, plus Persuaded by the Evidence, we have a chapter which he wrote.
Yeah, we got his
and
testimony in that.
Covers that. So actually he's in 3 of 3 of the
Persuaded by
books.
the evidence is going into a second printing, which I find
very gratifying.
Gratifying, yes.
Yeah. So it's sold 5,000 copies, which is good. And about 98% of all books sell less than 1,000 copies.
Mm-hmm.
So we're above the 98%. We're quite a bit above the 98%. Vast majority of books, by the way, sell less than 100 copies.
Is that right? I didn't know
the
that.
less, and I've got the data, which I can show you, but the vast majority sell less than 100 copies.
And my first book, Revolution Against Evolution, had the first printing was 2,500 copies, and the second one was 5,000. And I think I've got 8 copies left.
Okay.
So,
not bad, buddy.
So, and that really wasn't all that spectacular of a book.
I can read some of yours, Jerry. Yours are incredible. The footnotes alone would keep me occupied for 3 days, and right. I mean they're just copiously footnoted. When I look at the Slaughter of the Dissident, when I read that one, and then that one you had on the with Hitler on the cover. What was the name of that one? The one with Hitler on the cover. The Darwin? No, that's not the Darwin effect.
Hitler and the Darwinian worldview.
Yeah, and then
like
right.
And I look at that footnote, I go, wow, But folks out there, you can't believe we've been to Jerry's library, and it is amazing. This is a library that's bigger than most people's houses. What's your most? I know we're a little far afield there, but what's your most treasured or rare or most interesting book that you probably have in your library? Can you think about that?
Well, I have a book done by Sadis, who was the son of a Harvard professor, and he himself earned his PhD when he was like 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. And he knew like 15 languages, and he wrote several books, but he ended up getting burned out, I guess the best expression, and he died leaving primarily a collection of transfer tickets to his legacy, and he ended up accomplishing very little. He worked at menial jobs for much of his life, but he did write a number of books, which I managed to find one. Not many are around. In fact, I did find one on the internet, and they wanted something like $900 for it. So,
wow. When did he live?
He died, I think, in the 30s, 40s, around there.
Wow.
And so...
what did you write about?
He had... that's very esoteric topics. That's why he didn't sell many copies, because it's very hard to follow. But a lot of mathematics stuff he was oriented toward, and a lot of related. But he.
So you've met Dr. Damadian, I presume, and talked with him, and
talked on the phone mostly, and corresponded a lot. When I did the chapter on him, I sent it to him to make sure that it was accurate and up to snuff, which I do with all the stuff I write. I try to send it out to people who are knowledgeable so I can get some feedback. Sure. And so that's an important part of writing. It's said that books are never written by one person. Right. They're always written by a team of people, although the others may not get the credit they deserve, but nonetheless, stuff I've done has been extensively gone over by a number of people, and that way you make sure it flows right, it's accurate, invariably people catch things I missed. I might have the right spelling, but it's the wrong word. And it's similar to another word which I'm looking for, like break and brake. There are brakes in a car, and then to break a jar.
Yeah.
And so I've occasionally in the past, not a lot of those mistakes, but occasionally I've got that one mixed up. So I got to get the right break.
Well, I've always said that an editor is somebody that you hire to tell you that your baby is ugly.
Yeah, well, fortunately they didn't say that, but they said there's a few flaws on your baby we need to fix.
That's right, yes. Yeah. An auditor is the same way, but it's interesting that one of the things that came up right at the end of our fellowship with Dr. Damadian this time was his new research, which is really something that I think is going to help a lot of people, and he's finding out that a lot of his MRI machines are now being used in the analysis of the spine. And what I think he's demonstrated is that the lesions in the brain are being caused by the backup of cerebral spinal fluid that flows down the spine, back up, and there's a regular flow that goes on. And if there's a impingement in the cervical area, it will impede that flow to the point where lesions start to form in the brain. And he believes that this is a cause of things like Alzheimer's, MS, and Parkinson's. So I'm going to, and we're going to talk about taking my sister out there because after her brain injury to see if there's something that we can do for her, because he's actually been treating some people with actually a chiropractic maneuver. I guess it's a new, I think chiropractic has got maybe been barking up the wrong tree in a couple of areas because I don't think they focus on the cerebral spinal fluid as much as pinched nerves. But
in fact, I have the books over there if you want to grab that for a second.
All right.
And this is one thing, and it's cranial cervical syndrome and MRI, and the MRI can actually see things that the X-ray and CAT scans have never been able to see, and that's where these lesions, the fluids leaking out into the brain or being stopped and impinged. And he talked about, there's an actual special machine. What's it called? Let's see if I have it in here. There it is. It's called the Atlas Orthogonal Instrument. We're not trying to promote anything. I'm not going to make any money off this. It's just that it's the very top vertebrae very easily can knock out, and if it causes a bottleneck there, it could cause problems. He thinks, and he may be onto something very significant. What's interesting is the MRI allows all this to be seen.
Yeah.
You could never see anything before this. The invention that he did with magnetic resonance, and then that was the thing about MRI. It was NMR originally, nuclear magnetic resonance. They wanted to get rid of the nuclear word because people are going to get nuclear radiation.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to put the word imaging in it, so NMR became MRI. And that's where that comes from. So it's the same thing.
Right.
All right. And
the way it works is there's a magnetic signal that pings the atom, and then the atom responds with its own radio frequency. And so it's that radio frequency that comes back that is measured by the MRI. And the differences between the different kinds of atoms, and I guess that's actually the water surrounding those atoms.
Hydrogen, it responds to hydrogen.
And so that and the quantities of that in the cell in the various forms of tissue determines if it's diseased or not. Like cancerous cells, there will be a lot of cells that will have broken down and have lysed where they've broken apart, and that releases lots of water. And so there's the MRI is a breakthrough type of technology that has saved millions of lives, and I think this is something that we need to give Dr. Damadian credit for.
The other thing that's interesting is when you talk about the scanning of cancers, what they're doing right now, I guess we're getting pretty close to the end here, but it was interesting. He was talking about the technique where you could do a main scan for somebody who's got cancerous, but once you've done that initial scan, which could be expensive, insurance may not, $600 or whatever it is, you can, once you know where the tumor is, you can go in there in about 5 minutes or 8 minutes, you scan, it's like, you can find that the tumor, if the medicines is actually treating it properly and shrinking the cancer down. He showed us a scan where you see the cancers going down from week to week. They were doing a scan every week to show that. These are some revolutionary things, Jerry.
And instead of $600 a second and third scans, or
$60.
Yeah.
I learned to appreciate MRI mostly when I took a course in medical school in MRI, a whole semester. We studied MRI, and the professor brought us to the medical school's MRI, and basically they put one of the fellow students, in the MRI machine, and we scanned from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And we were in there for about 2 hours. And the detail was enormous. It was almost like doing a dissection, except it was black and white. It wasn't a color, of course, but I learned to really appreciate the enormous detail that you can pick up from the scans. And we didn't get photographs, we got right on the screen, so the detail was not lost.
Yeah,
So
and
we're
soft
able to,
tissue, the ability to see soft tissue was never like this. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize, too, when he was talking about how the difference ratio of decays between the different kinds of organs, they're mapping that out, and so you can tell which one's cancerous or not. So many things. It's really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm being told to wrap it up, so I guess we better do that. Huh?
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp, and this is Rich Gear, my
I'm your
co-host.
co-host here, and we are in part 2 of a really fascinating interview with Dr. Raymond Damadian, who's the inventor, really, of the MRI. And it's been so good to have you. I just feel so blessed and honored to be able to talk to you about this. But in our last show, we kind of finished up a little bit. We started to talk about the beginnings of how you actually built your first MRI machine. And before we get into that, we have an associate of yours, Doctor, right? Dr. Larry Minkoff, who has actually been involved with you from the very beginning.
Dr. Larry Minkoff.
Yeah, why don't you come in here? Yeah, that's great. And he's been a key component to your endeavors over the years, as I understand.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The first ever scan of a human being.
All right.
Although, as I understand it, it was supposed to be you, and you actually sat in the thing. And what was your partner, who the big guy?
Yeah, no, well, it was.
This is a funny story, so you got to hear this. This is really good.
Well,
I like it.
When we built the first scanner, which we gave the name Indomitable because everybody was ridiculing it, when we built the first scanner and we had it set up, the next thing, and we did it on test tubes and so on to make sure it was working, the next thing we had to do was get a human being to go in there. And nobody would go in there. There were all kinds of predictions about how it was dangerous and the magnetic fields and the RF fields and so on, and so nobody would go in there.
Well, you need to explain that there was a mouse that got fried.
Oh, you had to bring that up.
Yeah, there was a mouse that got fried, so there was a little
Well, one might think it just make you a little bit more attractive.
I don't know. It's in his book, folks. It's in his book.
Details.
Well, we might better mention his book, The Gifted Mind. This is the reason for the interview is to promote his new book, and we didn't do that in the last show.
We saved the best for last. It's a great book. It's a great read, and it gets a lot of interesting stuff in there. So anyway, the point was you got talked into it, or you volunteered, or somehow you were the first one to put the thing on your.
Well, but you did mention, you made an important point, Rich, because it had never been done before. So you didn't really know, the details of what was going to happen. And you were right. We went ahead and did an experiment on a test tube, and unwittingly fried the whole sample. So with the RF that was going in. So then naturally there was some uncertainties about this, and I finally agreed to get in, but I saw to it that when I got in, that I would have a cardiologist sitting there with me. I was connected to EKG machines, and I had all kinds of detectors around me just to be sure it was safe. And the only unfortunate thing is that all we got out of this first experiment was a normal EKG, electrocardiogram. We got no NMR signal. And the signal naturally was what we needed to make the image, and we didn't get a signal. And we had spent all this time and energy and money, and I was very depressed about this, and of course everybody had been ridiculing and at the outset saying it was absurd. And all of a sudden Dr. Goldsmith today, he was my graduate student who had built the coil, had the audacity to say, because he weighed 400 pounds, had the audacity to say that I was too fat for his coil. And I was loading the impedance of his coil by being too fat. And as a result, that's why we were not getting a signal. And that eventually, when we were talking about this down the road, became the Goldsmith too fat hypothesis.
You see, in the book, he's not he was a skinny guy back in the day, okay? I've seen pictures of you. You were pretty thin back in those days.
But it wasn't that I was too fat. I was too fat for Goldsmith's coil.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
He needed a bigger coil.
And I was loading his coil, and he could not make the coil 1 millimeter bigger and still get a signal.
Okay.
So, what was your solution?
So the only alternative to test the Goldsmith tube fat hypothesis was to get somebody skinnier.
Hence, we have Larry.
Well, at least you ended up not dying in the process,
No,
right?
yeah, that's right. I survived that first scan, except that we didn't get a scan.
Yeah.
So the only alternative was to get somebody to test the tube fat hypothesis.
So, what did you think about that? That you were getting volunteered about this thing?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than just getting it to Goldsmith's coil, because I was working on an alternative technique of my own.
Oh.
So why should I get it to his coil to get him
Oh,
his technique?
now something comes out. Okay.
His technique finished. So anyway, Mike argued that finally he made the coil a little bit bigger, and I was having other issues, so okay, we decided to try me and Mike's coil.
Okay.
And that's...
And you were thin enough.
So
that was Mike's observation.
But there were some key steps in the making of Indomitable. Okay, and we had to actually make this magnet. A magnet this big had never been built before like this. And the other big issue was the strength of the magnet is controlled by the amount of current, electric current, you can put into the coil. So just so we have an idea of it, when you have household electricity, your household electricity has 100 amperes in it, 50 amperes, 150 amperes. And if I sat down, I did the computer calculations, and there was one of our scientists, fortunately at the time, Brookhaven National Laboratory was making magnets. And they said that I could borrow their software to calculate the magnet I wanted to calculate. So I got the software with a bunch of IBM codes, and then I calculated the magnet that we wanted to build to put a human being in. I wanted to get the strongest possible magnet because it would give me the strongest possible signal.
Right.
And that was the big uncertainty, where we're going to be able to get enough of a signal. So when I calculated this magnet, now I realized very quickly, if I used a special kind of wire that was not ordinary copper wire, instead of being limited to 150 amperes of current, if I used a special kind of wire, I could put 1,000 amperes in. But it was a special set of circumstances. It was what we refer to as superconducting wire. And it's not made out of copper.
What's it made out of?
It's made out of the alloy niobium titanium.
Okay.
All right. Now, when you take that wire, niobium titanium instead of copper wire, and you make it cold enough, which you do by sticking it in liquid helium.
Wow. Okay.
You can put 1,000 amperes into it, whereas a copper wire you can only put 150 amperes into it.
Okay.
So I put 6 times as much current, I'll get 6 times as strong a magnet.
All right.
But now the problem was I'm going to have to make a vat that's big enough to hold liquid helium so I can put this wire in this liquid helium vat. And I'm going to have to be able to keep that liquid helium liquid. And helium don't like to be a liquid.
No, it doesn't.
Helium likes to be a gas.
Yeah.
And the way you get it to be a liquid is you go to ultra cold temperatures, which are 0 degrees Kelvin, which is 260 degrees below 0 degrees in the normal Celsius. So I was going to have to go to minus 269 degrees and have to build an apparatus that would maintain that minus 269 degrees so that I could put this special wire in it and have it superconduct. And we were going to have to build all this thing. That's why we called it Indomitable. So when I
But even getting the wire was a problem, wasn't it?
Huh?
Even getting the wire was a problem, wasn't it?
Well, no, it wasn't a problem getting the wire, but there were issues, okay? So I sat down and did the calculations with the computer program I got from Brookhaven, and my calculations for the kind of field strength that I want to call for 30 miles an hour, 150,000 feet.
Yeah.
Okay? And I said, uh-oh, we got a problem. And what was the problem? Well, when I priced out the wire, it's $1 a foot. So the wire was going to cost me $150,000. But all I had in my budget was $15,000. I had 1/10 the amount of dollars that I needed. So I wasn't going to be able to do it. And I was hoping that, well, okay, I'll have to go out and, make some grant proposals and get some people to invest money in this project, etc., in order to get the R&D development funds to try to build this human magnet. Well, the magnet that I was envisioning with the 30 miles of wire, the wire doesn't come on one spool. It comes on multiple spools. And in order to make this work then, I was going to have to take one length of wire and then take another spool and join it, and take another spool and join it in order to get the 30 miles of wire. So one of the things I realized right away was when I made the joint, I had to be careful to preserve the superconductivity of the wire, because when I made the joint, I could inject a resistance into that joint, and then I'd lose the superconductivity, and then I wouldn't be able to put 1,000 amperes in, and so it would undo the whole thing. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to have to learn how to make those joints so that I can make those joints superconducting. So I said, well, I know what I'll do. I'll call my buddy, the sales engineer at Westinghouse, that we had bought the smaller magnets from, and ask him to teach me how to make the joints until I can figure out how to get the money to buy the wire. So I called up, his name was Steve Lane. I said, Steve, can you teach me how to make superconducting joints with the niobium NVTI wire that we get from you guys? He says, wait a minute, Damadian, what are you doing? Are you going into competition with Westinghouse? And you want me to teach you how to do that? I said, no, Steve. I said, no. I said, I'm trying to make a magnet big enough to put a human being into it so I can do an NMR scan of this live human being. So he says to me, oh, it's good you level with me, Damadian. I'll share something with you that nobody knows. Westinghouse has decided to go out of business of making superconducting magnets, which they have been making for 10 years. And I have about 30 miles of wire in my warehouse I will let you have for 10 cents on the dollar. I couldn't believe what he was telling me.
That's incredible.
At the very instant I need the wire, he's got it in his warehouse and he will let me have it at 10 cents on the dollar.
Exactly the money you had.
I said, I just couldn't believe what was happening. At the very instant, he's going to go out. At the very instant, he's going to not only is going to let me have the wire, but he's going to go out of business and let me have all his wire. He said, when would you like the wire, Dr. Mann? I said, how about right now? He said, fine. He said, you got somebody send? Yeah. I said, I'll send Larry Minkoff.
That was a trip.
and Mike Goldsmith. And they'll come out and get it right away. He says, okay, send them. So Larry and Mike Goldsmith went out to get the wire. And they brought the wire back, and we built a magnet. And a few days later, my wife's mother and father are talking to me. And I said, boy, we had this extraordinary coincidence. She says, what are you talking about? I said, well, we were trying to build this magnet big enough to put a human being into. And when I sat down, Mom, to calculate the magnet, it's called for 30 miles of wire. It's going to cause $150,000. And I didn't have $150,000. So I decided to do something in between. And I called up Westinghouse. And Steve Lane at Westinghouse says, oh, well, we're going out of business. And I'll let you have the wire you need for 10 cents on the dollar. I said, I couldn't believe in that coincidence. And my mother-in-law says, that's not a coincidence. I said, what are you talking about, Mom? She said, ever since your father and I learned about you trying to build this magnet, we've been praying for it. This ain't a coincidence. This is an answer to prayer.
Yeah, so it's a
and
miracle of the wire. Yeah.
For that. I all the years since it's happened, I keep trying to explain myself how this could spontaneously happen at the very instant I need the wire. And
the exact amount of money.
There's an exact amount of money. There was no other explanation but his hand.
And it was his hand that is something that really changed the world in a lot of ways because of the invention of the MRI. This started a whole new industry and a new phase of cancer research that probably never would have happened if that would have taken place.
Well, just in a way of introducing it to you, one of the wonderful things that the Lord's hand gave us on the MRI was another breakthrough that was part of the discovery that we didn't expect. My original thought was the signal that we make the image, the hydrogen signal, should be different in cancer tissue than in normal tissue.
Right.
And that's the original measurements I made and showed that that was true. But what I didn't expect was that when I measured the other in order to know that we had an abnormal cancer signal, I had to measure the normal.
Right.
And so I made the same measurements on the normal tissue, and we measured on the soft tissues. We measured the small intestine, we measured the kidney, we measured the liver, we measured the pancreas, and we measured the brain. And to my great surprise, the signal was different in all the soft tissues.
Okay.
So that the decay time of small intestine was 256 milliseconds, and the decay time of brain, another soft tissue, was almost 600 milliseconds, is 595 milliseconds.
And these are both healthy. These are healthy.
These are healthy tissues, healthy soft tissues. But there's another critical aspect. They're the vital organs of the body. They're the organs that make you live or die. They're the heart, they're the kidney, there's a spleen. And all of a sudden, we're experiencing a difference in the signals of 135%. Now, the reason that's critical is that when I was an intern and a resident, you couldn't see the soft tissues of the body on a medical image.
No, yeah.
You just couldn't see them. And the reason you couldn't was the way the X-ray technology works. The way the X-ray technology works is you stand and there's a cathode tube in front of you that puts X-ray through you, and there's a piece of film in back of you, and what it does is it exposes the film. Now, as the X-ray is going through, if it goes through the brain and the heart at the same speed, then you get the same brightness on the picture, and you can't distinguish brain from kidney from heart. They're all going to give you the same brightness. And if you ask a more specific question, all right, when we make an image, we make an image using dots. And a typical image has 65,000 of these dots. And these dots are equivalent to the black and white dots you have in a newspaper when you make a picture in a newspaper.
Right, we call those pixels.
So, and they're called pixels. They're called picture elements. And a typical MRI image has 65,000 of these picture elements, or pixels. Now, if the pixels don't have a different brightness, your image is a blank, because when you go and look at the pictures, they all have the same brightness, and your image is a blank. And that was the problem X-ray had. The differences in the brightness of the pixels were maximum 4%. But what we discovered when we were doing this, when I was comparing the cancers to the normals, we found a big range of differences among the normal tissues. So liver, intestine had 253, and brain had 600, and the other vital organs were in between, which meant that we were going to get very different signals, and the pixels were going to be very different. And therefore, when we made a picture of these 65,000 pixels, we were going to see detail in the vital organs of the body that were never possible before.
Now, it also, once you've calibrated the normal tissues, then you can calibrate if bad tissue from those.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, is it the same? I'm assuming, based on what you're telling me, that every brain has the decay rate is the same. and every.
Well, not. Well,
I guess
very close. You know,
Yeah.
the difference from one brain tissue to the next is negligible.
That's what I'm asking. So
Right.
so then you can calibrate if it's a cancerous cell or something else that from one. You know, since you've got the measurements now of the normal tissues
Right.
of all the things in the body, now you can go out and calibrate all the ones from find out what
Yeah.
they got
Yeah,
lesions
exactly.
or tumors or whatever else like that. You can
Right.
see what it is. Okay.
So we got a big difference in the
Yeah.
decay time from disease tissue than we got from normal tissue.
Let me ask this question. This is kind of a really off. Maybe is anybody doing any research as why they think these decay rates are different in the different organs?
Yes.
I was just curious what factor in the designer's purpose, why they're that, why it would be that. I'm just, just the thought process comes to my mind when you said that. I said, yeah, the brain is different than the kidney. I mean, it makes sense they're different organs, but is there a reason that you've been able to maybe look into medically or scientifically as to why that would help the function be better or worse or different than from one organ to the other? I'm just curious. It's more. Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's okay.
I'll start my explanation of that by asking you a question. When we're scanning the body, what molecule are we getting this signal from that we use to make the picture?
Is it water?
Exactly.
I would say it's a water molecule. Yeah.
Okay. And we're getting it from water. Now, the thing is that, remarkably in this context, if I look at the length of the signal coming from liquid water, it's 1,000 times longer, or maybe, than it is from the same water signal coming from ice.
Okay.
So the signal is very, very sensitive to the structure of the water molecule. And the more liquid it is, the longer the signal.
Okay.
And the less liquid it is, like in ice, like in a crystal, the much shorter it is. So therefore, in answer to your question, each of these vital organs have a different composition of water, one to the next. And so the decay time of the signal is different in all of them for that reason.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
It's
amazing.
It's the difference in water structure inside of these tissues that's giving you the difference in the signal.
Interesting. That is fascinating. Yeah. How different is it in the body if it's all in liquid form? Maybe we're getting a little too esoteric and far afield, but I'm just.
We were discussing that before when you talked about the hydration shells around sodium and potassium. The water in those hydration shells is different than liquid water.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
No, but I think another way to say it, to explain it, is that decay time changes with the freedom of the water molecule to move around.
Okay.
If the water molecule is free to move around, you have a long decay time. If the water molecule is locked and doesn't have freedom to move around, then it's a short decay time.
Okay.
And so what we're basically saying is that the structure of the water itself on the inside of the tissue changes from one tissue to the next. And in one tissue, it has freedom to move around, like in the brain, whereas in the intestine, it has much less freedom to move around, so the decay is much shorter.
Interesting. Wow.
And the critical thing is, of course, is that in a disease tissue like cancer, there's a couple factors. When you look at the water content of disease tissue, it's as high as 90%. Whereas the water content of healthy tissue is 67%.
Oh, wow.
So the net result is the cancer tissue has a lot more water, and the water molecule has a lot more freedom to move around. And as a result, has a longer decay time.
Okay.
Does that have anything to do with cells lysing? When they die, they release water?
No, what'll happen is they'll fill up with water.
Yeah.
Because the other key aspect of this is the ability of the cell to contract itself. That the living cells have muscle proteins in them called actinomycin, and they maintain a certain amount of contractivity. When a cell dies, the cell just relaxes and fills up with water.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about.
Here?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, because we're able to see the vital organs of the body, thanks to the MRI, and we're able to see the vital organs of the body in detail in the images, it has created another potential. That is, we can take a patient who has a disease like cancer, and we can monitor the success of the response to the treatment that's being used.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Is the treatment working or isn't it working?
Mm-hmm.
And in a general way, the MRI is not being used today to monitor the treatment. What I'm suggesting here is that the patient would start therapy and would come back for a scan every week. And is that cancer responding to the treatment or not?
Right.
And if you see that it's not responding, change the dose of the drug, change the kind of drug, and also take into account is everybody's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
What works for him may not work on you.
Well, you also,
so just a minute. So if you set up a program where you can monitor the treatment, you're going to end up getting, I think, better outcomes from the treatment.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Now, there's a real good question. Is what you're suggesting, Dr. Damadian, is that practical? I mean, can you scan somebody, Dr. Damadian, every week when it costs $600 a scan? And
insurance companies aren't going to buy it.
What?
Insurance companies aren't going to buy it.
No, but I think we have an answer.
Yeah.
I think we have an answer that's going to make the insurance company happy instead of unhappy, and I'll explain. Okay? This is an example here of 4 images of a tumor that a patient had. It was an ovarian cancer that had attached to the colon. And you see here the tumor, the big white spot, and we have a measurement of how big it is in both diameters. And you can see that when we go through this first one before the treatment and down to the one after the treatment, that over a period, I think it's 2 or 3 months of treatment, the tumor went from that to
that little BB.
that.
Yeah, a little, yeah.
So,
Wow.
so we can actually use the MRI to monitor the success of the treatment.
That's
now, what I was coming to is when we do the first scan, in the MRI we do different kinds of cuts. We do a slice this way, that's called an axial cut. We do a slice this way, called a sagittal, and we do a slice this way, called a coronal. Now, when I scan the patient the very first time I ever saw the patient, I have to make about 100 slices because I don't know where the tumor is. And I don't know what T1 and T2 are going to give me the best image. But after I've done the patient the first time, I know exactly where the tumor is, and I know exactly which slice showed me the tumor. So now, if I want to go forward and monitor the treatment, all I have to do is repeat the same slice. And now I can repeat the slice in 10 minutes instead of an hour, and I can charge 1/5 of $600. I could charge $100, and I can do it every week on you and see whether or not you're making this kind of progress.
Yeah, that's
from
incredible.
A tumor here to the tumor that you see here.
That's exciting research.
That's a new prospect we have, and also you can't see it very easily on this picture, but we have here the measurements of the size of the tumor in millimeters. So this patient on this picture here, the diameter before the treatment was started, the diameter as shown in the measurements here was 73 millimeters. 2 months later, the same diameter is 15 millimeters instead of 73 millimeters. So we've been able to monitor here the effectiveness of the treatment in treating this patient's cancer.
Well, Dr. Damadian, I'm going to, we're going to have to bring this to a close here because
I didn't even get into all the other stuff.
I know, but
so many things.
because we're running out of time for this half-hour show.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.
O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith.